Welcome to Nuno Solutions, guys. In this video, I'm going to do a quick run through on how you can create controls that are very similar to the ASP.NET WebForms controls. In this case, we're going to focus on the label. So to do this, I've created a new project in Visual Studio 2022. The project that type is a Blazor WebAssembly app. And so I've just opened up the index.razor page and just deleted the default stuff that's in there. If I run it, I'll show you what it looks like. Right now, it's just very vanilla, right? There's nothing there. So first thing we're going to do is add a controls folder. Right click your project, click add new folder, and then type in controls. Then right click controls, add, and then just do razor component. And then you're going to type in label and press enter. That's going to add a label.razor control to your controls folder. Now let's add another file in here. Right click controls, add new item, search at the top for CSS. You're going to want to name this label.razor.css. Now you'll see that the label.razor.css is nested underneath your label.razor. Open up the CSS file, just delete the body thing that's in there and save it. And I'm actually going to add a class in here that I know I'm going to need. It's the disabled class. I'm going to use this disabled class whenever I want to disable the label. I'm going to apply this class to the control, and I'll show you what I mean in a little bit. So now I'm actually going just to delete everything in the label.razor. And I'm going to copy some code that I have on my other screen here, and I'll explain kind of what it does. My root element for my label control is a span element. I have the text that's going to appear in the middle here. This is how we're going to output the text inside of our label, or our label, right? It's going to appear within the span element. So you'll see here, I have this child content. Child content is simply a parameter. You see down here, any public property that you see here that has this parameter attribute is basically an attribute on your label that you can set when you're actually using the control as a label. I'll show you that in the index page when I actually add our label component to it. So essentially, if the child content parameter is not null, then we want to use that as the text. Otherwise, use the text string parameter. This text right here, that's right here. You'll see it. It's right here. It's a parameter of type string, and the name of this property is called text. So that's why it's at text. And we're only using that if this one is null. And then up here, I'm setting two attributes, class and style, and I'm dynamically injecting styles. Dynamically adding the attribute values in here, right, based on certain conditions in here. For example, like for the styles, if I want to make it bold, I have this bold CSS string, which is down here. It's a private string in this component. And all I'm saying is if the parameter bold boolean, which is this parameter here, is set. So in other words, when you add the label to the page, if you set bold equals true, then we want to append font weight bold to the style class in here. This would be replaced with this, right? And you'll notice that every time I output a string in here, I'm separating it with a semicolon, right? And then I have an italic, one for italic, and then this style one is that so that if I want to set any other style that I don't have a property in here for, like for bold, I have a bold property. Technically, I could just set this in the style attribute myself, right? But this just makes it easier to use the control because you just set bold to true and it becomes bold, right? So let's go into our index page. Let's actually use this label control. And I'm just gonna go down here. I'm gonna add my label. And it's weird because it doesn't recognize the control right now. So what I'm going to do, the reason why it doesn't recognize it is because it's in the different namespace. So when we added this controls directory, essentially it's nunosolutions.blazor.webforms.yt.controls. But we don't have that as a global import. So in this _imports.razor file, this is where you can import global namespaces that you want your project or your solution to recognize your project. So I'm just going to copy this, paste that in there, and then you see here it's at using nunosolutions.blazor.webforms.yt.controls. So this is the namespace that we're adding as a global namespace to import. We're going to close that. We're going to save it. And now you'll see the label turn green. Let's add a text attribute in here. I'm going to say hello YouTube. Exclamation. Let's run this to make sure that this compiles. And you can see we now have a label here called Hello YouTube. Pretty cool, right? All right, so let's close that. Let's say we wanted to disable this. We're going to add an enable attribute, and we're going to set it to false. We're going to run it. And you see now it's disabled. So to make this a little quicker, instead of setting these manually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to copy some code that I have here on my other page. And I'm just going to replace this with my code, and I'll just explain real quick what it is. So So I have a field set in here with a couple of checkboxes. One is for whether it's bold, italic, and the other one's for whether it's enabled or disabled. And you see I'm binding to properties in the index page down here. You see these properties, these Boolean properties right here. Is bold, is italic, and is enabled. They're bound to the checkboxes. So whenever you check mark the checkbox, it's true. If it's unchecked, it's false. And then down here, where I'm actually adding my label, right? And I'm setting this enabled attribute to is enabled, which is this right here, right? And now whenever this is toggled by our checkbox up here, it should toggle whether it's enabled or disabled. Same thing with is bold. I'm binding our bold attribute to the is bold property in here. And then I have italic also bound, and I'm just setting the text, this text to label 1 for now. So if I run this, if I click bold, it should make it bold. If I make it enabled, it becomes enabled. If I want it to be disabled, I uncheck enabled, and I could also make it italic. Now, in the ASP.NET Web Forms, we're very used to adding an ID to the server-side control, and then using that object name or ID, and then using the dot property notation to set properties, right? In Blazor, you have to use a view model. Right, technically right now, I just have the properties directly in the page. I just want to show you something though. But if you did want to add a reference, an ID to this, the way you would do this in Blazor is you use @ref equals, and then you could do label 1, right? And now that we have, and then also I have label, our control, also referenced here as label 1. We're declaring it, right? So this is basically saying that this control is referencing label 1, is referenced by label 1, and then since we're already declaring label 1, the variable, as a label, it automatically knows that it's pointing to this control. Here's the interesting thing. If I save this bottom section here, you never ever want to depend on reading properties from a reference to one of your controls like this, because it could be incorrect, and I want to show you what I mean by that. So right here I have label 1.enabled, and then I'm saying if the label control is instantiated, because if you have to do this, because if you load the page, you'll get an error because it tries to load this reference before the control is actually loaded. So it gives you a null reference exception. So I'm checking if label 1 doesn't equal null, then I'm going to output label 1.enabled to the screen. That's going to give you a true or false. But until it's not null, it's just not going to output anything. And now, same thing with this. Is enabled, which is this property down here that enabled is bound to. Same thing. If the label control is not null, then we're going to output the value of is enabled property, which is this here, this Boolean property. So let's run this. And the thing is that these properties can get out of sync. So if I do enabled is true. You can see the control is actually enabled. But look at this. Label 1.enabled, it thinks it's false. It's almost like it's grabbing the previous value. But is enabled, which is the Boolean property that we defined in the page, is set to true, which is actually the accurate value. So just be really careful. If you're trying to do label.text, using the reference, you're going to have trouble with that. Lots of trouble. I tried doing that and it just didn't work. That's pretty much it for this demo, guys. I am planning to do another demo on how to create a text box, web form-like control. Probably that'll be my next video. But I hope this was helpful to you, especially if you're an old school web forms developer like I was. So it was really cool to start with that. But I hope this gives you a good idea of how you can build custom Blazor components that act very much like ASP.NET Web Forms controls. Thanks for watching, guys. Please click the like button if you like this video and subscribe to get notifications. Thank you. Take care.